A CEO wanted to get out of paying $250 million to the developers of Subnautica 2, so he asked ChatGPT for a plan, and according to the court ruling, over the next month, Krafton followed most of ChatGPT's recommendations. So, how good is ChatGPT in a situation like this, and can it save you $250 million? Judging by the 92 pages of what I will describe as legal smackdown that Krafton just received, really not well. Even Krafton admits that now, announcing to IGN that Subnautica 2 will launch in May. That was announced one day after the verdict. This whole trial is absolutely absurd. It's also not quite done yet, so there could be even more chaos. First, a reminder of our characters and the story so far. So, the PUBG publisher Krafton acquired Unknown Worlds, the developer of Subnautica, in 2021. Subnautica was a good indie game. It made a load of money. And since it was 2021, it was the pandemic era funding crazy period the games industry went through, Krafton's CEO, Changham Kim, offered $500 million for the company, plus $250 million in bonuses for performance, with the leads of the company retaining operational control. So if you're one of the Unknown Worlds leaders, wow, you got a hell of a deal. I mean, $250 million in performance bonuses written into this binding contract. It's almost so much money that maybe if you actually had to pay up that amount of money, it would be really uncomfortable. Seems that may have happened to Mr. Krafton. After the acquisition, Unknown Worlds' founders, Charlie Cleveland and Max McGuire, actually stepped back, and they left CEO Ted Gill to basically run Subnautica 2 while they went and worked on other projects. These are things like a strategy game called Moonbreaker. Now, those projects had mixed success, and the pair eventually wanted to just step away from game development altogether, even doing things like making a Christmas movie. Bit of a weird story. Getting back to the real topic, Unknown Worlds, under Gill, geared up to release Subnautica 2 in 2025. Now, that would be just in time to hit the deadline on the $250 million bonus owed to the executives and some of the original staff of the company. And that, rather unsurprisingly, is where things took a turn, because Krafton's CEO had no intention of letting that payout happen. And what follows is what the court now agrees actually happened. Here's where we'll begin the story. Charlie Cleveland burned out after the failure of the game Moonbreaker. He then told the dev team and the Krafton reps and took some time away from the company working on films, including a Subnautica film. So that's one of the main two guys. The other one, McGuire, didn't think that he fit in the corporate environment and wanted to work on external projects, things like seeing how Subnautica was resonating with kids on the autistic spectrum. So he wanted to follow that type of thing. And basically, neither of these two guys was involved in active development by this point, and unfortunately, development on Subnautica 2 was struggling. Now, in 2024, McGuire and Cleveland then came back, and they helped build a prototype, basically an attempt to get things back on track. Now, all three of them then decided on a leadership change for Subnautica 2, which involved them elevating some of their internal staff. And by May of 2025, Unknown Worlds had turned around the development of the game and was actually preparing for the early access release. And here is where the maths really starts to matter. But don't worry, not in a boring way, in a very spicy way. It seemed things were going to go quite well. Krafton had predicted, quote, over 1.67 million copies sold by Q4 of 2025. That is, if the game launched in August. That would mean that worst case, the bonus payout would be $191.8 million. And in the best case, it would be $242.2 million. And obviously, the CEO of Krafton was not really thrilled about this. Here's a quote. Everyone admits the contract was a bad deal, but the problem is that we keep being the fool even afterward. It's not about the money, it just feels awful to be taken advantage of. For a registered director, being a pushover would even amount to a breach of fiduciary duty. Not really great, is it? And in his own words, he would have to be accountable for the payout being a bad deal for Krafton. So by this point in our story, it seems Subnautica 2 is back on track. Krafton's own estimates do seem to suggest that they would be facing a major payout, and the CEO basically feels really shit about this, and seems to have felt that, oh my god, you know what, was I a pushover? Did I really mess up whenever that deal was done? think many people would maybe say yes. Now here's where things amp up. In video game publishing, you basically have milestones, and whenever you hit your milestone, you'll get the next tranche of your funding, which will cover your payroll and things like that. So in May 2025, there was another milestone review, one that Krafton chose not to approve. And this is where Krafton's head of corporate development tried to warn Kim that the state of the game would not hold up as a reason for firing the leadership, and in his words, it could create a debatable issue in potential litigation. But Kim, the CEO, remained focused on the risk here. Krafton claimed they'd only gain an enterprise value of 93.5 million USD in the event of a worst-case payout. This was not good. So he turned to your boy, ChatGPT. And ChatGPT told him it wouldn't be easy. But moments later, Kim got the corporate developer leader and his legal team on the line and sent them part of the payment agreement where the payouts were contingent on the leadership's continued employment. So they basically looked at this and they started to work out a plan to get leadership to take a deal or to otherwise force them out. Here's another fun quote. At ChatGPT's suggestion, Kim formed an internal task force dubbed Project X. Very cool. So the plan was literally designed by ChatGPT, and Krafton followed it. And it's the enacting of this plan that basically made all of this stuff go public, and that's what led to our coverage last year. Now, you may have remembered all those strange blog posts about releasing the best game possible that basically happened before the leads got fired. Well, that was part one, called Preemptive Framing. Taking away Unknown World's access to Steam and their site, that was part two, Securing Control Points. Then, legal demands saying that Cleveland and Maguire needed to step back into active development, well, those were part three. Quote, Systemic Materials for Legal Defense. And even though this plan was concocted by Sam Altman's finest GPUs, it didn't seem to work. It did not work by this stage because the leads did not budge. Kim's head of strategy and operations then tells him, quote, it might actually be easier to just do a takeover. Kim then tells him to, quote, set a date. Krafton went on to fire all three leads, saying that they had to be dismissed because they wanted a premature release of Subnautica 2. This is quite something. They are basically saying that these fellas wanted the game to come out before it was ready, I guess probably so that they could get the payout. They then brought in the CEO of Striking Distance Studios, you may remember Callisto Protocol. They brought him in as a replacement. They delayed the game, but then they offered the remaining staff some bonuses for delivering. Krafton stacked the board with their own directors and ensured that the game could not be released without their approval. The leads had been trying to preserve data from their servers, and they've been doing this for weeks by this point. This is, of course, after the Steam lockout. Clearly, they knew something was going on, and they wanted to preserve as much evidence as they could. Now, when asked, they returned all data to Krafton. And then, the legal disputes start. The judge considered Krafton's arguments here. And before the trial, they had already dropped the claim that the game wasn't ready. Instead, it became about Cleveland and Maguire's engaging in dishonesty, them abandoning their posts and stealing data after the firing. These arguments did not go well. The court had no patience for either of them. It saw multiple instances of Cleveland and Maguire's new positions being discussed or internally monitored, with no attempt to stop them. And meanwhile, the downloads of data didn't actually show any dishonesty. They just showed worry. And they can't be used after the fact to justify the firings. You know, you can't really be fired for something that you did in the future. At least I don't think we have that technology. And then there's the inconvenient thing of the emails. There are emails from Kim himself explaining that he wants to fire the leads so he doesn't have to pay out the $250 million. In the court's own words, here they are. Facing a 9-figure liability, Krafton went searching for a pretext. That is damning. And with that, Vice Chancellor Lori W. Will of the Delaware Chancery Court hands down a verdict. And it's not good for our boys at Krafton. Gil is to be immediately restated as CEO as he wished. He has, quote, full operational authority over the company. Another quote, he was, by all accounts, a highly effective executive in the view of the court. So good result for him. Cleveland and Maguire don't actually get to come back to their previous roles because they were, quote, peripheral to the development of Subnautica 2, and the court can't force Krafton to rehire them, but what they can do is they can give Gil the authority to do so. More than that, though, the bonus period is now extended to September 15th, 2026, with an option for a 6-month extension, and Gil gets to supersede the board. The board is still packed with Krafton directors, but now Gil gets to supersede them on any decisions about launching Subnautica 2 whenever he thinks it is ready. He even gets back control of the game's Steam page. That's quite the result. But you may be wondering, well, what about Subnautica 2? And what about the people who have been, turning up to work and working in the game as all of this bullshit has went down? So the devs have been working at Subnautica 2 through all of this. They've been showing off devlogs and story beats in the month since the firings happened. And the people who've stayed have done the best job that they can, while all of this legal tug-of-war stuff has just been playing out around them. But the judge's ruling actually makes the damages quite clear here. I'm going to quote directly, key staff members have quit, and the early access release of Subnautica 2 has been put in jeopardy. Now, these are people who had nothing to do with a contract dispute, nothing to do with Project X, and, they are kind of the ones paying the price for it. At the very least, on a day-to-day basis. No one wants to have all of that chaos hanging over their work. But unfortunately for them, it's not over. Just one day after the verdict, Steve Paputstis, I really can't do his name, sorry Steve, but he sent an internal memo to the team announcing that Subnautica 2 would launch in early access in May. Steve was the executive that Krafton installed after the firings, and under the judge's order, he was no longer legally CEO. Krafton then confirmed the date to multiple outlets. Gil was not consulted though, and now, according to GameFile, Gil's lawyers have asked the court to consider contempt, saying that Krafton announced the launch without his knowledge or authority, robbing him of control over the marketing and release strategy that the court had just restored to him. And the rushed 2-month window, of course, might damage marketing opportunities and with them damage the bonus payout that the second trial will be measuring. Yeah, there's a second one. Krafton's defense? Well, they say the memo was simply, quote, celebrating an earlier milestone review. In a separate filing, Krafton's lawyers have asked the court to determine when the ruling actually goes into effect. They dispute Gil's team's assertion that it was effective as of 9 a.m. on Monday before the memo was sent, and say that it shouldn't kick in until a formal implementing order is signed. Meanwhile, Krafton told Kotaku that they respectfully disagree with today's ruling and are evaluating their options. The second part of this trial is still to come, and that's where the judge will determine if Krafton's actions wrongfully impaired the earnout and whether any resulting money damages are owed. So effectively, if Subnautica's eventual launch does not meet the internal projections, then the leadership and any devs entitled to bonuses could end up getting compensation as well. So, let's sum up what Krafton wanted out of all of this and what they're getting. They wanted to make all the money from the Subnautica 2 launch, but they did not want to pay out an extravagant bonus to the team at the studio. Now, they may have damaged their own game, damaged their own launch, and they may still have to pay out an extravagant bonus plus damages, and they could be facing contempt on top of all of it. And all of that so that Krafton CEO didn't have to lose face from a pushover contract and relied on ChatGPT over his own staff. Yeah, quality result, and as for you and me, we got a damn entertaining story out of it. I can't lie, this one is just so weird and wacky that, honestly, it is just funny. Now, for something that is actually very important, that's directly about PC gaming, where this market's going, some really big issues, you need to check out this video next, because we have got a trove of juicy new data about what's actually happening on PC and on Steam.